Well, how are you doing? I know we use that line as a greeting without really expecting a response, but I really mean it. How are you doing at this stage of your life? It seems amazing to me that the one inevitability in life is aging, and yet it's the one thing we want to avoid and don't really want to talk about or really make any preparations for. I wonder if this describes your attitude. Have you taken time to reflect on what you've been through in life? You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly? Have you considered how it's made you who you are today? Have you considered changes that you may need to make as you enter the last third of your productive life? You know, denial is a river in Egypt, but if we camp there, things usually don't turn out too well. So this series will discuss some of these issues and then offer some steps that I think you'll find helpful on your journey of finishing the race that God has given you.
Welcome to our Leadership Matters podcast. Phil has had the privilege of mentoring leaders and coaching ministry teams around the world for several decades, and he's really looking forward to sharing with you some of the principles that others have found helpful over the years. To access all of our podcasts as well as our leadership resources, just click the links in the description box or go to icmcanada.org/leadership matters. If you want a copy of this complete study, just click on the link to download it. Now let's join Phil for this episode.
You know, at some point along our journey, we come face to face with our own mortality. Now, for some, this occurs as maybe a result of a dramatic event, or for others, it happens more gradually as they age. You know, the psalmist reflected on the brevity of life when he prayed, "Show me, Lord, my life's end and the number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. You have made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is as nothing before you. Everyone is but a breath, even those who seem secure." You know, in the New Testament, James describes our life on this earth as a mist in light of eternity. I know this can seem rather depressing, and particularly if you believe that our life here is all there is. If that would be the case, then living for today and getting all we can out of this life would make perfect sense, wouldn't it? However, as believers, we have a hope in a future that transcends our short life here. Paul puts it like this: "Do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way," he says, "to get the prize." You know, he seems to be making the point that our life here is important in light of eternity, and so it matters how we run the race. You know, as we know, life expectancy in most societies has increased since those days, but even 100 years is not much in light of eternity. But this longevity means that current generations are dealing with more and varied stages of life. You know, we're dealing with issues that previous generations did not even have to deal with. You know, at a time when we have the luxury of reevaluating our lives, most of the previous generations were already dead. So depending upon the life expectancy in your society, the life stages and transitions may look a little different, and the time frames may be a little different. But there's always transitions in stages of life, regardless of where we are. You know, ideally, this latter stage of life should be characterized by a time of, self-assessment, reflecting upon our journey thus far, and how we can prepare for what God may still have for us in the future. So in this first episode of this series, we'll begin by looking at some of the issues that often surface during this time, and then discuss ways we can recalibrate our lives to finish our race with passion and purpose. Of course, as we get older, we realize we have less life in front of us than we have behind us. But if we don't take intentional steps to adapt and adjust, it's just possible to not finish our race well. And how we finish our race here has implications as we prepare for the eternal plans and purposes that God really has for us. You know, all this talk of our eternal home can be seen as kind of an escapism, or maybe a lack of engaging in this life. You know, but the biblical authors, they didn't hold that view. They actually talked a lot about our eternal home. It seems that they were making a connection between how we run our race here with our life to come. I mean, beyond salvation and just making it into those pearly gates, they connected our quality of discipleship here with the quality of our future life there. The two are not completely separate realities. I like Paul's attitude when he wrote to the Philippians. I press on towards the goal, he says, to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. But how do we maintain this positive perspective throughout our life? How do we keep engaged here and press on, knowing that this life is but a mist? For some of us at this stage of life, there can be a sense of grief as we realize that some, or maybe even many, of our dreams will never be fulfilled. All of us come to that point when we have to acknowledge that some of our dreams of youth will likely never happen. This can be rather painful, can't it? But again, denial is not a strategy at this point. So we have to address the elephant in the room. But even if we have processed this loss and are relatively emotionally healthy, we'll still likely have to deal with watching the next generation surpass us. Instead of being the smartest people in the room and the most energetic and the strongest, we notice we're kind of getting a bit slower and others are overtaking us. This is inevitable. But how do we deal with this reality? Do we try to hang on to the past, or are we secure enough that we can pass on influence and authority to the next generation? As we progress through the stages of life, we can pretend we'll stay young forever. There's whole markets that are created for that. But it's inevitable that this approach will eventually catch up with us. Even the Apostle Paul, the great man of God that he was, wrestled with this in 2 Corinthians 4. Yes, it is God's power within us, he teaches in many places, but this does not mean we're not hard-pressed on every side, he said, and often feel perplexed, and at times struck down. You can read the litany of his problems that he had as he sprinkles throughout his writings. But Paul also wrote of another reality. Therefore, he said, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we're wasting away, inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs all these earthly troubles. So we fix our eyes, not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since that which is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Wow. As believers, we know that death is a mere transition from our life on this earth to what will be our new reality. But this journey into the unknown happens to all of us only once, usually. And so there's no mulligan or dress rehearsal. We don't get to practice first and then do the real life. So it's a skill that needs to be learned, which is why we may need to change our perspective and be proactive in assessing our situation and learning to adapt as we age. Of course, the adjustment is not always easy. It can actually even be a bit frightening. Perhaps for the first time in our lives, we may feel kind of not in control of what's happening to us as the changes just keep coming. Remember Jesus' words to Peter after he encourages him to keep on keeping on. He said, feed my sheep. Let's keep on keeping on. But now I know he was describing Peter's death, but I think there's a wider application as we age. He says, when you were younger, you dressed yourself, Peter, and you went where you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you may not want to go. Yep. The longer we live, the more this will become a reality for each of us, like it or not. Now, for some, recognizing they are entering this final stage of life is triggered by a major crisis or traumatic event, or events. As I mentioned, this is kind of what happened in my case. But these crises or events usually confront us with the reality that we're in the final third of our life. And this can be rather challenging if we've not incrementally going through the losses of life and processing them along the way. If we have been in denial by keeping busy with activities and friends and vacations or even ministry, this can hit us like a ton of bricks. At this point, we do have to deal with our issues, or we will not finish our race with an attitude of grace and gratitude that Paul had. The danger is to get stuck and not be able to move forward to fulfill God's purposes in our lives. For others, they may only experience the need for minor readjustments as they run the last lap of their race. But regardless if it is a traumatic experience or more of a gradual realization, isn't it important during this season to reflect upon our lives, including any unwanted baggage we may have picked up along the way? Only then can we move forward in a healthy way. Over a lifetime, I realized that I developed a lot of strategies to deal with personal and organizational ministry issues, including setbacks and painful experiences. But I'm not sure I was intentional enough in preparing for this last stage of life. Maybe you can relate to that. Have you been intentional in considering how you can finish this last leg of life? As we discuss some of these things I've learned in this process, I'm pretty sure that you'll be able to identify with at least some of the lessons, and hopefully you'll be able to apply them to your life as we proceed. In his classic book, Seasons of Marriage, Norman Wright explains that men seem to be more surprised by their mortality than women. Almost as if life has played a trick on us. He goes on to say that some men even create an interesting illusion about life. They equate work success as a means of protecting themselves from the eventuality of death. In the chase to keep death at bay, many continue to avoid the reality of their own demise. But in order to, in seeking success in whatever field we may have, we discover that if we are avoiding this fundamental fear of death just by keeping busy, we will actually create greater tension for ourselves as we age. Wright continues that in order to guard against this fear, many men just work harder, longer, faster, all in an effort to keep death at bay. As we get closer to the end of our lives, though, how we view this transition will have a huge impact on how we run the race we have. For those who throw themselves into their work or ministry in order to guard against the fear of no longer being relevant, there's the very real danger of blowing a gasket with the resulting physical and mental health outcomes. So in this series, we want to be able to take some time to consider questions that will help us apply these principles in our own lives. You may wish to pause the episode at certain points when I ask questions, or do it at the end of the episode. But at this point, let's pause for a few moments and consider a couple application questions. Number one, what do you see in your life that indicates that you are facing a transitional stage in your journey? And two, what steps have you already taken to prepare for this?
To view or listen to any of Phil's other podcast series, visit icm.org/Leadership Matters. His Mentoring Intelligence series discusses issues of servant leadership and how to leave a legacy by investing in others. Other series include a study of how to develop and manage multicultural teams, a series to strengthen your marriage, the first team, as well as a discussion of how to implement the equipping gifts in a local church. You could also check out our CLI, Christian Leadership Institute, which is a unique competency-based ministerial training program. To download any of our resources associated with these series, visit our library of materials at icm.org/resources.
As we conclude this episode, I'd like to look at two issues that may help us recognize that we are in the last third of our journey. You may wonder, I'm sure most of you know, but the first of these are physical and mental realities, and the second are some relational indicators. If you're following along in the notes, we are probably we're on the top of page 3 now, and so if you want to follow along, that's about where we are. It's a fact of life that at some point realize that we cannot take our body for granted. Perhaps you can still remember those days when you could pull a few all-nighters and to get work done and then not miss a beat the next day. Well, if you're anything like me, those days are way in the rearview mirror. If I try to do that now, I need a couple days to recover. Yeah, it's a bit humbling getting older, isn't it? Now, I'm not sure when it happened to you, but I can still remember when I began to notice that the old body just didn't function the same way as it used to. To keep it going takes a bit longer, takes a bit more care and attention, kind of like with an old vintage car. But until we get our resurrected bodies, this is just a part of our physical existence that is not much fun at all. But as Paul encouraged us, do not lose heart, he said. Though outwardly we're wasting away, you might say amen to that, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. Elsewhere he says that while we are in this tent, we groan and are burdened, longing to be clothed with our heavenly dwelling. The reality is that we all face this transition. Going from brown hair to gray hair to no hair, or a gray beard in my case, to increasingly, larger belt and dress sizes, and perhaps even more serious health issues if we have the privilege to live long enough. But in addition to these physical changes, it can be even more concerning when we notice how aging begins to impact our mental capacity and our memory. I remember the days when I used to be able to go down and several rabbit trails in a message that I was sharing, and always kind of find my way back to the main point. However, I've now discovered that if I get too far off track and too far down the rabbit trail, I can get in trouble and maybe never find my way back. It's likely I'll get that faraway look in my eye, which is me thinking, now where in the world was I going with that? Man, no, maybe you can relate to that. Now, most of these new realities are not insurmountable. They happen to all of us and we take them in stride. But it would be a mistake to misjudge their accumulative effort and impact on our capacity in moving forward. To finish well, adjustments will need to be made. So where are you at? As I started at the beginning, how are you doing? Consider what physical realities have you begun to notice, and how have you accepted these? How have you adjusted to these? How have they impacted your ability to do what you once did? And what steps do you think you can take in order to slow the aging process and maintain a level of health? Now, another indicator that we have entered this latter stage of life are the relational changes that occur during this time. Typically our children are now adults, and this brings about different challenges. This can be particularly painful if our grown children are no longer following Jesus or are estranged from their parents. It is also during this season that some couples decide to split up, after 30 or 40 years together, which of course makes this time of life even more painful. The fact of the matter is that we have not put probably the work in through the decades of marriage, and if we don't do that, the relationship will probably likely run out of gas at this point. Once the kids are gone and it's just you and your spouse again, one day you may look at the other person in the house and wonder, who is this stranger? But though a challenge, it's not impossible to reconnect during this time in our marriages, in our relationships. But of course, as everything in life, it will take some effort. For others, there's the pain of dealing with the empty nest of no children around. This can be somewhat mitigated by grandchildren, but it is a time of painful transition for sure. All this requires redefining our family lifestyle. It is true that before we had children, we were a family unit. And though children were happy and a welcome addition to our family, once they are gone, we as a couple are still a family unit. It might be good to make a few comments here about grown adult children. It's a little bit beyond this particular series, but I've observed many parents who carry the burden of children who are not following the Lord. That's natural. And this is a pain that really never goes away, does it? But it's not helpful or healthy for parents of estranged children to unnecessarily beat themselves up, wallowing in shame and guilt over children that have left the faith. I think some of this guilt begins with a faulty theology based on a wrong interpretation of several biblical passages. We read, train up a child in the way he should go and he will not depart when they are old. We're kind of thinking this is a proof text or a guarantee, but it's not. It's a proverb, which by definition means that this is the way things kind of normally go, but it's no guarantee that things will always turn out sunshine and roses. God has given all of us, even our children, a free choice. Actually, love requires such a choice. The fact of the matter is that many Christian parents have done their best and trained their child, and yet have nonetheless watched their grown children renounce the faith, fall into addictions, or choose alternative lifestyles. You know, the pain they experience in their old age can be all-consuming and overwhelming. But I think it's important to be reminded that we are responsible to our grown children, to pray and to provide unconditional love. But we are not responsible for our grown children and their choices. They are responsible for the choices they made as adults. And often, for your own health, you have to allow them to make those choices, just like you did. Just like you were allowed to make your choices. And depending on the situation, you may even need to create boundaries in your life for your ongoing health and well-being. Now, there's a range of books on this topic, from basic parenting strategies of grown children to dealing with difficult situations when adult children are dealing with addictions or unhealthy or even exhibiting dangerous behavior. But spoiler alert, each of these books is more about you growing and changing as a parent and learning new healthy ways of dealing with your adult children, not about changing your children. I've listed a few books on the screen. If you want, you can take a look at them. Of course, much more can be said on this, but but it's worth mentioning, even though we don't have the time to go into depth here, that even the most perfect parent in the universe, God, our Father, still has many wayward children. He did everything right, and yet they have still chosen to reject His love. Actually, at one point, we were also like that, weren't we? But love means giving someone the free will to make their own choice. While it may hurt deeply, you do not need to live under the guilt and shame for the rest of your life. The what ifs and could haves are endless, aren't they? But I would encourage you to accept God's grace. We're not perfect. We understand that. And while we take ownership for how we may have contributed to the issues in the family, we and they at some point have to acknowledge that we did our best, and then we have to move forward. If they have their own children, they're probably making some of their own mistakes inadvertently also. So also, we may need to experience God's grace if we've gone through the pain of a breakup of a marriage during this period. Regardless if you decide to stay alone or enter a new relationship later on in life, you'll have a new set of challenges and issues to deal with. And sometimes this can be compounded as we age. But we will discuss those issues in greater depth in a later episode. So as we wrap up this first episode, here are some couple questions to consider. What are you noticing about your relationships and your family situation during this season? How has this affected your health, your mental state, and your vision of your future moving forward? In the next episode, we'll look at two typical scenarios we face at this stage of life: disillusionment or apathy. What are some of the first steps we can then take to move forward towards finding new meaning and purpose in this transition? I hope you'll join me as we discuss all this next time.
Thank you for listening to Leadership Matters. If this has been helpful, please remember to like, subscribe, and share us. Doing this will enable others to benefit from this material as well. And remember, if you would like to have your own copy of this study, just click on the link in the description box, and for any of our other leadership resources, go to our website, icmcanada.org/resources.